Hello and welcome back to Medical Compliance with Clarissa. I'm Clarissa Benfield, our Global Business Line Leader and the Director of our Global Medical and Laboratory Business here at Intertek. And today I am so excited to be joined by my colleague and our Assistant Medical Chief, Yaqing Liu. Hi, Yaqing. How are you doing today?
Good. Thank you for
Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you for joining us. So maybe, Yaqing, to get us started, you can tell us a little bit about how you came to the medical industry, how you came to Intertek, and kind of your history in the medical space.
Okay, so which means I have to introduce myself.
Yes.
First, my name is Yaqing Liu. I am from China, and I have been with Intertek since 2008. Started as a project engineer and all the way come up to assistant chief last year. And my major responsibility is for medical device and laser product compliance evaluation. And I really like my job because I really feel that we are the gatekeeper for medical device to be safe before they go to the market. And also I'm very active with standard committee work because I do believe a good standard is making many of our life daily job much more easier, especially for the medical device manufacturer, testing lab, as well as regulatory organizations.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, one of the areas that I'm really excited to talk to you about today is obviously, market access and regulatory requirements with China. So as you said, right, you're from China, this is near and dear to your heart, and you've been instrumental in assisting with this process. So maybe we can get started a little bit by chatting about just the NMPA in general, what it is and what this means in relation to medical devices.
Okay, so first we want to explain what is the NMPA because many of the people, they don't know. NMPA stands for National Medical Product Administration. It is equivalent to US FDA, and they had actually former name, which is CFDA. And I personally think that's better name because people can remember. But now they call it NMPA. So NMPA mainly responsible for accepting medical device manufacturers' registration application and approve them so that after that medical device can be sold in China. So that's mainly what the NMPA does.
Yeah, and I think the China market is really interesting, and traditionally it's been a challenging market for medical device manufacturers. Obviously, we've spoken with a lot of our manufacturers over the years. So maybe you can explain a little bit about, what the historical process has typically been for a medical device manufacturer attempting to get their product into China, and what that looks like as it's been, and then we can talk a little bit about the future of NMPA now that they've made their investment.
Okay, so this is a history story that I would like to tell you. So traditionally, if a medical device has to get into the China market, especially for class 3 medical device and class 2 medical device, they have 3 steps to go. First is all the medical device has to be tested in China NMPA government test lab. So there's no excuse. You have no exemption from that. Second is all the class 3 medical device and some of the class 2 medical device shall go through the clinical trial. And the last step will be the medical device manufacturer prepare all the registration document, submit to NMPA and get approval from NMPA. After that, you can have your medical device get into China market. That's the traditional way.
And I think it's important to note, right, one of the biggest challenge areas or the areas that manufacturers struggled with, right, was having to send those samples to be tested by a government lab or having government officials come to your facility to do the testing. So I think that's always been, part of the challenge with getting devices into China was, having to navigate that process working with government labs. So then we saw they made this announcement, right? I believe it was announcement 126, that was allowing for some changes, right, with self-testing and self-testing reports. So maybe you can walk us a little bit through that process as well, with the kind of exciting change that they made and what that means for manufacturers.
Yeah, I'm really glad that you are following this new requirement. So basically, NMPA announcement number 126 was published in October 2021. That announcement is to setting the new requirement for NMPA accepting medical device testing report, the new rules was setting in that new announcement, basically allow our medical device manufacturers submit self-testing report for their medical device NMPA registration. So now the question becomes, what is, self-testing report? Is that right?
Yeah.
It's kind of a weird name, self-testing report. So the self-testing report actually is named in order to distinguish from NMPA NMPA government test lab registration test report. Because if it is an NMPA registration test report, then the NMPA government test lab is responsible for the test lab. Now, based on this new requirement, the medical device manufacturers are responsible for self-testing report. That's why it is named as a self-testing report.
Yeah, and I think you're right. Self-testing, the name itself can be a little bit confusing, right? So what exactly does that mean? Does that mean self-testing me as the manufacturer? Does that mean self-testing? What is the clarification of what self-testing actually means?
Okay, that's really good question. So there are two different test labs can submit a self-testing report. First, of course, it is the manufacturer or applicant internal test labs. But in order to submit a self-testing report, those internal test labs shall meet NMPA announcement 126, a quality system requirement, additional requirement. Yeah. And the best way or easy way for manufacturer to do so is to get China CMA accreditation for their internal test lab, which I don't think most of the manufacturers, they are not willing to do this because it's extra work. And the second path will be the medical device manufacturer let the CMA accredited third-party test lab to do the test and complete the report, and then so they can use those reports to submit for their NMPA registration. So those are the two different type of test labs that can do this self-testing service. And
with, go ahead, please.
Oh, okay.
So with these, I'll ask one question of you here. So with these self-testing labs, be it either, self-testing at a manufacturer or self-testing with a third-party lab, does the requirement still exist that testing must be done locally in China?
Yes, in general, which is true. So because there's no other, at this moment, there's no CMA accredited third-party test lab outside of China. Only, I just checked a couple of days ago, only 63 test labs in China, located in China, are accredited by CMA. And 50 of them are those old NMPA government testing lab. Only very few are third-party test lab at this moment. And the process of accreditation is very rigorous. And at this moment, only 3 international testing labs achieved the CMA accreditation for NMPA self-testing service. Among of them, our Intertek is one of them. So I'm very
which we're very excited about. Yes, we're very excited
right.
about being able to work through this process. Because as we know, right, as we talked about at the top of the call, right, it is really challenging for a medical device manufacturer to get their product into China traditionally. So being able to support and help them through the process, right, is really exciting for us, especially being able to leverage the labs that we have in China, going through that CMA accreditation process and being up and ready and ready to go. Maybe we could look a little bit too at, what are some of the benefits of working with one of these CMA accredited third-party test labs to do these types of projects for NMPA?
Okay, this is a very good question, but very hard to answer, actually. I have to be very careful. So if you remember, I just said that there were only limited NMPA government test lab in the past, around 50, let's say. And because of a limited number of testing labs in the past, most of our medical device manufacturers has to wait for a long time for their product to be scheduled for testing, and also wait for a long time for the project to be completed. In average, based on our client feedback, 6 months waiting time for a project to be scheduled and 18 months for the project to be completed. It's really long process for our medical device manufacturer, and which kind of delay their product to go to the market. So now, based on this new requirement, which is NMPA announcement 126, and there will be more and more third-party test lab, to get the CMA accreditation. So we will have a more third-party test lab to join this service. So this actually definitely will improve the project testing waiting time and the project completion time. Another benefit I personally think, or I can see, is if this third-party CMA accredited test lab accidentally to be an international, testing lab like Intertek, then Intertek or this type of international test labs have a tremendous experience with medical standard testing. And because of the global organization, then we really can help our medical device manufacturers to improve the communication, to make the communication smooth between the test lab in Intertek or in China and the medical device. This is one of the most benefits I personally think that would be. So make our device manufacturers' life much easier.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you make such a good point about the overall timelines, right? We talked to a lot of manufacturers who have attempted to get into China, and especially now with these supply chain issues that we've been seeing and just delays in product development, but then to have to wait another 6 months to get in the queue and another 18 months to have clearance, it's a long time to wait. So oftentimes anything that can be done to bring in that timeline and get the product to market faster is obviously going to be a major benefit. And, just now having more options with the additional third-party test labs that have been adding capacity, to be able to support more products getting into China, since we know there's such a huge import market for medical devices. So really exciting to see that this process is moving forward. One of the things I did mention earlier, sometimes we would see with the CFDA, NMPA, that they would come on site and do testing. So what if I have a big piece of medical equipment and I can't ship it? I was never going to be able to ship it to a government lab. Can these third-party accredited test labs for self-testing, can they do witness testing or on-site testing? How does that process work when working with one of the accredited labs?
That is the answer for that. You will like it. It's yes. Because,
oh, good.
So in general, if the medical device is small and it can be shipped, then the Chinese government require the device to be tested in China. However, if the device is huge, like as what you said, it cannot be shipped, for example, CT system, MRI system, then the test lab can go abroad or on site to do the witness test. That's for sure. It's exactly same as before when NMPA government test lab come abroad to do the witness test or on site test. It's exactly same. The rule didn't change.
That's perfect.
For the CMA accredited lab. It's exactly the same.
Oh, that's perfect. That'll make it easy for those manufacturers who have large pieces of equipment, of course, that weren't going to be able to ship them either way. Yeah, absolutely. So with this process of working with a third-party test lab, who makes the submission to the NMPA? How involved is the third-party test lab with the NMPA process itself versus just the testing process?
That's a good question again. You know why? Because that's exactly what the announcement number 126 stated. It is actually the manufacturer's responsibility to collecting all the registration document, including test lab, submit to NMPA, not the third party. Accredit third-party test lab's responsibility. Third-party test lab only responsible for the testing that they are qualified by CMA.
Yeah, and I think that makes sense, right? We see that with a lot of regulatory agencies. Ultimately, at the end of the day, right, it's still the manufacturer who's going to have to make that direct submission as it's their product, right? And they have the ownership for it. And then the test lab can support with all of the testing and the other pieces that are part of that process.
True.
Yaqing, what about some of the requirements for documentation being in Chinese versus English versus other language? How does that work when you're submitting all of your documentation that's supporting your medical device evaluation?
So this rule actually also didn't change. It is same as before. All the majority of the registration documents should be in Chinese. For example, your manual, your product, the technical requirement, and also the process document, which because that is now for the third edition requirement. But for the development verification document, it can be in native language of that country. Those are the things that are allowed to be not in Chinese, but the majority of the registration document has to be in Chinese, even including the labels, all those type of things.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And then obviously we would assume that all of these third-party test labs who are now participating as part of this program would naturally then have to have people who are, speaking multiple languages to be able to support the Chinese aspect as well as some of the other pieces.
One more thing, more important, the test report has to be in Chinese, of course.
Yes, very important. Very important to have, right? Yeah, absolutely. So I think one of the areas too that we saw maybe confusion before was the standards and which versions of the standards that China was willing to accept versus some of the other, global regulatory markets for medical. So with this new announcement and with this change, what version of the standard are they accepting? What are we looking at in terms of the Chinese national GB standards? Like, how did the standards playing into the evaluations that we're seeing now?
Okay, I'm really glad that you asked this question because from May 1st, 2023, which is 2 months ahead of us, China will require the new standard, which is a GB 9706 2020 series, include general, lateral, and part 2 standards to be used for NMPA registration test. So this is a really big change. It's almost like in US and Europe to convert the second edition, standard requirement to third edition in 2010 and 2012. That was a really big change. So now it's same thing for the NMPA registration requirement. So this is really important for our medical device manufacturer to pay attention and make themselves to be ready for this change. And the standard, the second edition of GB 9706 was published in 2007. So China was really behind the rest of the world. And after more than 10 years, they finally finished their harmonized 9706.1 2020, which is equivalent to IEC 60601-1 3.1 edition. And they also published 7, I think, it should be 7 collateral standard, which are aligned to this general standard. They named GB or YY 9706.10X. So which means if 1-3 equivalent of IEC, then it will be 103. And if it is usability, then it will be 106. And if it is a long standard, it will be 9706.108. So etc. There's only one thing I really want to point out is for EMC test standard. So in US and in Europe, use 60601-1-2 2014 at this moment. But this new Chinese version of the standard, they published 9706.102 2021 version. However, that is only equivalent to IEC 60601-1-2 2007 version. This is
I see. Yeah.
Difference. And at the same time, China also published more than 50 Part 2 standards, which are aligned with the new general standard, the 3.1. These are the detail of Chinese standard publication. And I remember last year we had this public webinar, which talk about the detail of those standards. So anybody, want to look at that, we should, introduce them to our public webinar.
Yeah, we can definitely share the webinar where we went in a little bit more depth into some of those for sure, and the information being shared. I do think it's, really interesting as well, right, to bring up the standards for, manufacturers who are looking to go global, and remembering that, maybe the FDA might require the 3rd edition amendment to most recent version. The notified bodies might ask for state of the art, so you're going to 3.2, but then realizing that, when you're going to the China market, they've only upgraded from 2nd edition to 3.1. And then really important distinction, as you said, with the EMC standard, that they're only to the 2007 version, right? So there's a lot to kind of keep in mind in terms of when you're testing for standards, to make sure that you're covering yourself for all of the target markets, since although it's great news that China has finally, migrated away from the 2nd edition, it's not necessarily to the edition that all the other regulatory agencies are asking for.
That's exactly true. And I really hope our medical device manufacturers be ready and change their NMPA, testing report to the new version, because there will be everybody requiring this. And that's, again, our CMA Accreditation body test lab can help and contribute for this part.
Yeah, and with this change in the standards, right, as you said, coming in May of this year, has the NMPA or CMA announced is there a transition period, or is it after that effective date, everyone will need to be to these new versions of the standards?
So they have not officially, published the transition date, because this announcement was announced 2 years ago. Says May 1st of 2023 will be the day that you have to apply with. So they already waited actually 2 years, of course, because of the pandemic, everything, slowed down. And however, I think the government will allow a little bit more. At least my expectation will be around 1 year minimum to still be the transition, period. If you have a new product, I don't think you have transition time period anymore. So you have to test to the new standard. But if you have existing, medical device which already been registered with NMPA, then before this May 1st, they actually say you are volunteer to, retest your device based on the new standard, but you still can use the older standard, since the time is too close to May 1st. So I really think our medical device manufacturers should retest their product based on the new standard.
Yeah. And I think you made a really good distinction in there as well, that, one of the great things about this announcement that they made and the new requirement is that you can work with a third-party test lab to do these self-testing reports for existing products or for your new submissions, right? So you have a little bit of support on both ends.
Mm-hmm. That's true. And I really I forgot to say one of the benefits of using, a third-party test lab, but you point out is manufacturer actually had more options to choose, whom they want to work with. They have more control on selecting the test lab, to help them to complete the NMPA registration related testing. Yeah. That's, I think, another benefit of this new NMPA announcement 126. I'm sorry.
126, yeah, absolutely. Well, Yaqing, it was so great to talk to you about this. As I said, we're very excited about us launching this program and being able to support and the announcement that was made out of China. So is there anything else you want to leave our manufacturers with who are joining in? Any other comments on NMPA or the process?
I think we have talked about everything. And if our medical device manufacturer needs our help, definitely they can reach out to us, and we definitely want to help them as do our best to help them.
Yes,
I think that's our goal. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, really exciting. So thank you everybody so much for joining us. If you have questions, please feel free to reach out directly. Thank you so much.
Thank you.